Hey guys, so today we're actually going to be talking about something that's going to be a little bit different. So we've talked about feudalism, and we're going to be starting to talk about how feudalism started to decline. But before we jump in, I just wanted to explain why I'm doing this. So this is something called a screencast, which I'm sure some of you have seen before, but I really wanted to try to think it's a really cool way to get this information across. Plus, you don't have to hear me talk all of class, so I know we're all excited about that. But it's a really cool tool, and you can reuse this later, so if you're having some trouble understanding this concept, maybe you can rewatch this later. Or if you're absent, you can watch it at home. Look at that. Aren't I just the best? Alright, so as we're going through, I'm going to put the slide up, and then I want you guys to fill in the blanks as we go. If you need to pause the video, that's fine. Go ahead, do what you need to do. But we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So here's what we're going to be talking about with chapter 5. So feudal system, it worked for a while, right? We had that king, the lords, the knights, and then the serfs. So it works for a long time, but then it starts to decline. So there's many of these different causes that lead to the decline of feudalism, right? It's not just something that people wake up and go, oh, I don't want to live like this anymore. Let's change everything. No, it has these different causes. And historians, there's so many causes that we could really look at, but we're going to mainly focus on 3. So we're going to look at political changes in England, this terrible disease, and a long series of wars. But just today, we're going to talk about these political changes. Okay, so there's 3 major political changes that without these political changes, we wouldn't have the United States that we have today, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So we're going to start talking about Henry II. So Henry II is the first king that we're going to talk about when it comes to these political changes. He and his wife, Eleanor, they ruled from 1154 to 1189 in England, right? So they ruled about 35 years. Pretty good king. You know, he's kind of the start of these political changes. So, just to give you a little bit of background, he was said to be good-looking, red-haired, freckled, he had a large head, he was kind of short and stocky, his legs were also bow-legged, so when people walk, they normally walk, one foot in front of the other like this. He kind of walked like this a little bit, because he had been, he was riding horses a lot, so not in the best shape, but you can see with this picture right here, I know my face is there, but get over it. It's this building of a church, so it's kind of symbolizing that he's bigger than the church, so he's the one in charge. So here's his big thing that he does. So he makes legal reform the central concern of his reign. This is what he wants to be remembered for. So he insisted, this is an example of what he did, he insisted that a jury would formally accuse a person of a serious crime, and then it will get tried before a royal judge. So before, under the feudal system, the lords kind of made their own rules, right? The lords could pick the judges, make the punishments however they wanted to. When people moved to towns, each town kind of made their own rules and laws. But then Henry started to make it so it was the royal courts. So the king could appoint a judge for that town, and the judge followed these laws. So those judges and juries, right? There's no more trial by ordeal or combat. People aren't killing each other trying to prove that they're the innocent ones. Now there's these trials by judges and juries. And it takes power away from the lords, those feudal judges. But here is the big issue. Henry tried to make the king more powerful instead of the church. Again, God rules everything in these people's lives at this time, so the church was the most important thing. But he's trying to take power away from that to give it more power to the government. So he issues these Constitutions of Clarendon. It's a document that he said, this is what a king should do. As a king, these are my rights that I am supposed to do. The biggest thing was that he said that he had the right as king to try the clergy. So the members of the church accused of these serious crimes, instead of being tried in church courts, they needed to be tried in royal courts. This is a huge deal. Remember, the church kind of ruled everything. Yeah, you had the king, yeah, you had the lords, but if it was the Pope saying, you should probably do this, you're going to listen to the Pope. Well, now, with these legal reforms, the members of the church had to be tried the exact same way as everyone else. no special privileges. People are not happy about this, especially if they're very high up in the church. So there's this guy, his name is Thomas Beckett, and he's the Archbishop of Canterbury. Remember, Archbishop, yeah, it's third in the list, right? You have Pope, Cardinal, Archbishop, Bishop, Priest. But an Archbishop was still really powerful, because the Cardinals kind of stayed with the Pope. The Archbishop was like the one that you would see more of. So Henry issues these. Beckett says, no way, we're not signing this. This is ridiculous. Later, he's like, well, I kind of see your point. I'm still not going to sign it. So he and Henry kind of get into this big fight, and Beckett actually runs away to France. So they kind of write back and forth, and we have these letters, and Henry finally is like, look, you have to come back. We need to talk this out. People respect you. People trust you. You're a good archbishop. Come back so we can talk this out. Didn't go so well. So in 1170, there's these 4 knights. We don't really know much about them. What we know is that they decided that they wanted to get on the king's good side. So they found Beckett when he was praying in front of the altar of Canterbury Cathedral, and they killed him. If you guys remember back when we did these stations, the church stations, and you had to do that station with the reliquary, and you had to like read the people and pretend, and you found the reliquary of Thomas Beckett, that picture with the candle in front of the altar, that's for Thomas Beckett. Because Beckett, his tomb becomes this like destination for pilgrimages people go to, and the church proclaims him a saint. So they say, look, he's this holy person, he's this great person, he did so much for the church, he's awesome, we need to give him this sainthood. But even though Beckett kind of disagreed with Henry, nothing really came of that argument except that most of these constitutions stayed enforced, right? So they were still there, people were still using them. Took power away from the church and the feudal lords and gave it to the king. So the second political reform is by someone named King John. So Robin Hood, we all know the story, right? I'm sure we've seen the Disney movie. If you haven't, go watch it. It's fantastic. The Robin Hood myth portrays him as this super evil villain who stole for the poor. He's just not really a good king. He has no idea what he's doing. He's not the oldest son. So, in 1199, Henry's youngest one, his youngest son, John, becomes king. John, again, is not the greatest. So, he makes these enemies by losing the land that the English had controlled in France. So, they want to cross the English Channel, right? There were, political marriages, people buying, selling things, blah, 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 blah. So, the English had some land in France. Well, he lost them because he couldn't either pay for it or he couldn't defend it. So then, he would tax his barons, tax his nobles heavily, and he ignored their rights. So if they said something that he didn't like, he would just arrest them and throw them into jail. And maybe you see your family again, maybe you don't. Most likely not. Also, so you have the king, right? He's arguing with his nobles, and then he's arguing with the church, and he's taking all this money away from them. They are not happy. Nobody is happy. The nobles feel like he's taking away their rights. The church feels like he's taking away their rights. So here's what they do. They kind of rebel against him. And here's how. So in June of 1215, these barons, these nobles, they forced this meeting with King John in a meadow. Okay? And they basically said, you need to sign this or you're done. And they insisted that John put his seal to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Remember, we talked about the charters in towns, right? It's that document that gave them independence. Well, this Great Charter gave things to the barons. So at first, it really protected the rights and privileges of the nobles, right? It's the idea that, look, we're having this agreement, right? We as nobles say, yes, the king should continue to rule, but there are certain things that you need to do in order for you to be a good ruler. Originally, it was just for the nobles, but then it became this more broader meaning. And it's really this foundation of civil rights and liberties that, again, we have today. So, here's what it did, basically. King John agreed to observe this common law, right? He can't just make up rules just to make them up. They have to be, in agreement with everybody else. It has to be the same thing everywhere else, right? You can't say one law here and then one law in another town and be completely different. It has to be the same. So he says we're going to observe this common law, and I'm still going to observe these rights between the barons and the church. So, for example, instead of just randomly throwing out taxes, he has to talk to the nobles, he has to talk to the church officials. He also agreed that no free man could be jailed except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. So this idea becomes this thing called habeas corpus. And we still use that in the United States today. It's the idea that as an accused person, you cannot be held in jail without the consent of a court. So, if you're accused of doing something, right, and you're put into jail's holding until your trial, you have to go to trial. You can't just, stay there for hours. No, you can stay there for hours. You can't stay there for years and years and years and years without being seen by a judge. So that's the second political reform. The third political reform is King Edward I. So you have Henry, his son John, and then John's grandson Edward. And he took this major step into really bringing more people into the government. You have to remember, guys, at this time, the only people who made the laws were the very, very rich, or the very religious. Basically, the people with power. So Edward starts to call together this body called the Model Parliament. So it included commoners, low-ranking clergy, as well as church officials and nobles. So it was able to take all of these different people with all these different ideas to make these laws for them. That's awesome, right? That's what we have kind of today. Anyone can have a say. And it's really instrumental in making these new changes, and feudalism starts to decline because people don't have to listen to the lords anymore. They can just go to model parliament if they want. So here's the impact, right? There's two major things that contribute to the decline of feudalism. So you have your three changes, and here's how they contribute. So, some of these changes took away things from the nobles. It took away things from the rich. It took away things from the lords. Remember, under feudalism, yeah, the king was in charge, but the lord was able to make his own laws and own rules in his own manner. So he kind of had more power. Well, now he's taking that power away from the nobles and giving it back to the king. Then, you take the other part of the power, and you're shifting it to common people. So you have nobles, kings, and common people. Common people are starting to rise up to here, and the king is starting to rise above everybody else. This is huge, because without these political changes, we would not have our modern democratic institutions. We would not have what we have today with our Bill of Rights if it were not for these people in England making these ideas. So here's your impact of your three. Okay? So these are your three changes. You will want to know these. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So, the impact of Henry II's legal reforms is it strengthened common law and the roles of judges and juries. That's his big impact. The impact of the Magna Carta that we still have today is that idea of rights and liberties that even the king cannot violate. Just like we have in the United States, we have rights and liberties that the government cannot violate. Right? Bill of Rights. It also said that monarchs should rule with the advice of the people that he's ruling. Right? If you don't have any idea of what your people want or what you want them or what they want you to do, you're not really going to be a good leader. So it's saying, hey, look, yeah, you're still in charge, but you should be giving us a voice. Then Edward I takes that even farther by giving his model parliament, by giving a voice in government to the common people as well as the lords. So Henry and the Magna Carta kind of take power away from the lords, but then kind of gives it back in this new, fancy way. But without these political changes, feudalism would still be around. The idea now is that more people are equal, and more people are able to work together. And the feudal system where, you have your lord in charge, that's no more. They're not pledging loyalty anymore. They're pledging loyalty to their king as opposed to their lord. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. You should be looking on Google Classroom for your next set of directions. Bye!